Please be seated. Have you watched a movie or a TV show recently that was filmed in the 80s or 90s? I don't mean one that was filmed recently but set back then. I mean one that was actually filmed in the 80s or 90s, especially if it was set in New York City. And if you have you seen an establishing shot that includes the whole Manhattan skyline with the Twin Towers? Do you remember how you felt when you saw it? I've been occasionally streaming and comfort watching news radio recently, and the opening title sequence of that has a shot of the World Trade Center in it, and it startles me every time I see it. It's jarring to remember the time before 9/11, the time when those towers were simply a ubiquitous part of our cultural zeitgeist. There's a sense of nostalgia about seeing them, but there's also this foreboding, right? Because we know what happens. There's something similar going on in today's gospel, because Luke's gospel was written after the destruction of the temple. So when Jesus talks about the temple being thrown down and the disciples asks, when will this be? Everyone in Luke's audience already knows exactly when that will be, because it's all already happened. The wars, the insurrections, the rising nations, the earthquakes, the arrests, the persecutions, all of that has already happened. Now, the characters in the story don't know it, but the community that is gathered around to hear Luke's good news, like us, they do. The same is true of Isaiah. The verses that we heard today were likely written down towards the end of the Babylonian exile, or possibly even during the post-exilic period when the rebuilding of Jerusalem was already underway. So it's not exactly prognostication to say that God is going to do a new thing in Jerusalem, because God was actually doing a new thing in Jerusalem right then. Now, true, many of those verses in Isaiah still haven't come to fruition yet, but there's only so much before time, after time that you can see from the thin space of the present. What looks bright and eternal might in fact crumble to dust, and what doesn't look like anything at all can become the star that guides us through the long, dark night ahead. Now, the book that the Religion and Culture Reading Group chose for Native American Heritage Month was Ladder to the Light by Bishop Stephen Charleston. He's an Episcopal bishop and a Choctaw elder. And he opens the book with an anecdote about a conversation he had years ago in a New England parish filled with, quote, largely professional people with comfortable incomes, well-educated, well-read, and alert to the news of the day. Now, I know for a fact that Bishop Charleston was at All Saints in 2001, but I will not presume that he's necessarily talking about us, but if the shoe fits, right? By all of society's measuring sticks, he says, they should have been among the best and brightest and most optimistic. The bedrock of an enlightened spiritual community. They should have been confident, but they were just the opposite. They were worried. He asked them to name one institution, one public system in our culture in which they had complete confidence. And the room was silent. Now remember, this was likely more than 20 years ago, maybe even before 9/11. But if there was silence then, what would we say today? Are we more confident than we were 20 years ago? Or less? We are beset by questions that make us uncertain, says Charleston. And it does not matter whether we label ourselves conservative or progressive. The reality we share means many of us are losing confidence. We are worried, we are afraid, and we are looking for a way out of the darkness. Unquote. And boy, today's gospel really pushes all of those buttons, doesn't it? Hearing this gospel is not a whole lot different from hearing the news. Wars and insurrections? Check. Famines and plagues? Check. Dreadful portents? Check. We are worried, we are afraid, we are looking for a way out of the darkness. A people without hope, says Bishop Charleston, even if they possess all the wealth in the world, are weak and easily swayed. And therefore, he says, we are only as strong as what we hope. We are only as strong as what we hope. And if we can't answer the question, what institution, what one public system do we have confidence in, then maybe that's the wrong question and leads to a draining of hope. Maybe the question we need to be focused on instead is, what do we have faith in? Who are these beings who are actually around us? What does give us and them hope? Real hope, not false hope. See, looking backwards, it's easy to be enthralled by both nostalgia and progress, and to be vexed by either how much or how little has changed. And looking forward, we can be transfixed by the promises of technology and human ingenuity, or we can be reduced to shuddering dread at the coming collapse. All fear and all false hope, says Margaret Wheatley, arises from looking backward or forward. All fear arises from looking backward or forward. And so the thing to do, she argues, quoting a 19th century Tibetan Buddhist, is do not prolong the past, do not invite the future, don't be deceived by appearances, just dwell in present awareness. Which to me sounds an awful lot like Jesus today saying, don't be led astray, don't follow people claiming to be the one, don't prepare a cogent 12-point defense of your beliefs. Instead, abide in me. Abide in present awareness. And by endurance, you will gain your souls. Now, of course, abiding in present awareness is incredibly difficult when all of these other things are going on, right? But, as Wheatley says, it is only in the present moment, free from all false hope and fear, that we receive the gifts of clarity and resolve. Freed also from anger, aggression, and urgency, we are able to see the situation clearly, take it all in, and discover what to do. Bishop Charleston echoes this when he says, don't look down, Don't look back. Don't look away. Look up and be confident. Learn from the past and look at life as it is without editing it to look better. See what is really there, because hope arises when we embrace this sacred reality. In the darkness, he says, in the valley of the shadow, we feel isolated and afraid. But once we have the light of hope, we begin to see just how many people share in our struggle. And instead of seeing strangers in the dark, we begin to recognize fellow climbers in the light. When we see by the light of true hope, when we see what truly needs to be done right here and right now. Advent is this wonderful, mysterious before and after time. We know, in Advent especially, we know that Christ is coming as liberator and as judge. And we know that the light of Christ is even now glimmering in the gestating darkness. We know that Christ has died. We know that Christ is risen. And we know that Christ will come again, and that we are watching and waiting for all of this to continue to unfold. So the best thing we can do now is wake up and not get lost in the fear or the anticipation of either before or after, but faithfully prepare. Dwell in the present moment and cultivate true hope so that we will be ready when Christ is revealed among us. Amen.